Welcome to another edition of The Warning. As you can tell from my location and the setting behind me, I'm not in my usual spot. I joked around, maybe people would think I'm scouting out safe houses, anticipating a Trump victory, but we're not quite there yet. Anyway, I'm pleased today to be joined by John Miller, who was the head of NBC television marketing and amongst a long career. One of the things that John did is talked about is launch The Apprentice, the marketing for the television show, which some say is the vehicle that Trump used to become a credible presidential candidate. At the end of the day, I'm not so sure, but John has publicly talked about his bad feelings and guilt over all of this. I thought we'd have a conversation about it today. John, welcome.
Thank you very much. And you do look like you're in a bunker. So whether it's real or not, that's pretty good planning, I'd say.
I'm in a undisclosed location
Okay.
today.
Me too. Me too, I'd say.
Donald Trump is threatening to pull the license of CBS News, and the crowd cheers behind him. You launched The Apprentice. It was a television program. Everyone is familiar with it. You have some guilt. I don't think you should, and I guess we'll talk about that. But so you talk about what you did in your career in television, just real quickly that led up to it, and how you
Well,
think it ties in here.
well, my career in television, the more positive pieces of it, I created Must-See TV and launched all of those shows that were on those Thursday night lineups. My first year in marketing, we launched The Cosby Show, Miami Vice, Highway to Heaven, Hunter, a bunch of other things, and it took me all the way through The West Wing and everything else. So I launched and did 12 Olympics and 5 Super Bowls, and so that a big career. But The Apprentice was one of those things where we created a false narrative about Donald Trump. The idea was the ultimate job interview. You don't win a date, you win a career. And in order to make that work, you had to have the apprentice be partnered or mentored by a legitimate businessman. Now, Trump was selected largely because he had time, said yes. A couple of CEOs said no, and and he loved being seen. He loved the adoration. He loved the filming, and I think he loved almost a lot of other because he was the star and created a narrative that he always sort of wanted to see for himself. Limousines and helicopters and gilded palaces and smart ideas, but none of that was really apparent. And the producers of the show, I had to the marketing, but the producers of the show often had to sort of strangely manipulate things in order to make him look like he was knowing what he was doing. But that was sort of the conceit of the show, that this great businessman was going to provide a year-long mentorship and $250,000 salary to someone who won that prize. And so it wasn't a date, it was a career. That again was also a bit of that's how it was marketed. And he did get the first everybody that won did get the $250,000. Did they ever get a mentorship with Donald Trump? No. And that was dropped after season one, kind of. But we were pushing the narrative that he was a legitimate businessman all that time. And right now, the reason I came forward is up until 2022, when I retired, I was a senior executive with the company, and it was probably inappropriate for me to create a largely partisan message, which this is. But ultimately, I figured I had to come forward before it was too late to let people know that the narrative that we created rather relentlessly and beamed into American TV homes over and over again, that he is not a legitimate businessman. He is sort of what you see on display, unhinged, a little wacky, wants publicity, has a compliment hole that cannot be filled, is inappropriate in many ways, has racist tendencies that I could share a story with on, and all of those things I wanted to say. And then most specifically, as the economy and how people felt he would do with the economy seems to be one of the leading things that maybe undecided are still sort of wrestling with. I wanted to say that he really is not very good at that. He bankrupt four of his companies while before The Apprentice, two while he was doing The Apprentice. So he had six bankruptcies under his belt. I'm not sure that he's more worried about his belts than he is about running for president. And as a result of that, I wanted to let people know that he was never a great businessman. That was a TV illusion. And if you're thinking that he is somehow going to make economy better, then maybe I better say something before it's too late. So I've talked plenty of times. Let me throw you in as a question here.
When I listen to you talk about this, what strikes me is your seriousness and your earnestness about that, hey, we did this, we marketed something that wasn't real. But do you think that anybody watched The Apprentice and thought it was on the level, that Trump was a legitimate businessman? Because I think you're putting a lot of weight on your shoulders with regard to something that, despite the name of the genre, and you look at it from a perspective, and I'll address my innate small c conservatism here,
Okay.
right? Which is 1883 is a great example. If you were coming across the Western Plains, a lot of people didn't make it. If you lacked common sense, if you lacked good judgment, you just didn't make it. And so I still grew up in an era at age 54 where it was impressed upon me as a young man that no one owes you anything. And two, common sense is an important virtue. So I grew up in northern New Jersey, where Donald Trump entered my frontal lobe and thus consciousness sometime in the early 1980s. Like, call it 81, call it 82, right? Whenever the art of the deal is in the book, and all of that later. Do you think that Donald Trump is a con, or do you think he's a reflection of some type of id that runs through the blood of the American people? The one thing that I have a hard time with when we talk about Trump is the notion that there's any surprise about Trump.
Well, there's a number of questions there. First of all, I would say that he will say and do whatever he can or wants to in order to get what he wants to. And also, he will then repeat it over and over again. So I find it, he's been sort of a phony in that particular way. In some ways, he's very clear. I want to go back to one thing that you said about, I'm trying to remember exactly, so a number of those things, um, about Trump. And do I think that people feel that it's going to make any difference about what we did with The Apprentice? And in that way, I have heard on a number of occasions people say, well, I know he's a legitimate businessman because I saw him do it. It was in Maggie Haberman's book that she wrote about him. There have been other people that said that, oh, well, he did The Apprentice, and so he is a good businessman. I don't think that people think this nearly as much as you and I do. And they may not pay attention. Everybody has busy lives. So the impressions that The Apprentice, the show, gave, but more importantly, what I have said that I'm responsible for, is way more people see the promos than see the show. And so in little 30-second, for a number of years, 14 seasons, which probably represent about 7 years or so, because there's 2 seasons a year, that he was a legitimate businessman because that was the conceit of the show. And he's an entertainer somewhat, but he's mostly had the idea that he was a legitimate businessman. And so I wanted to make sure that people knew that that was largely a television creation. And in the case of a marketing standpoint, it was a marketing amplification of that sort of narrative that was largely put together for the television show. Now, as it relates to the American public, and do they think that they're smart? I think an awful lot of people don't pay a ton of attention. Are you familiar with the XFL, which is the first version of the thing, that combination between NBC and okay? Well, I was also responsible for marketing the XFL. There was no there. But yet we got ratings that were higher than the Super Bowl for the first time because we had positioned it in a certain way. So would American believe that somehow there's going to be something special between the WWE and football put together to create something special? Yes, they believed it for a week. And then they saw it and it wasn't true. In the case of Donald Trump, his was always apparent all the time and is sort of reinforced all the time that he was a legitimate businessman for years and years. And so do people still think that? Or do they think that he is what you see as such a fool that you could not possibly believe that? Well, clearly, when you look at the polls, some people still believe it. And I wanted to say that if you think that he is legitimate because of The Apprentice and or the work that we did, that is absolutely false. It was a creation and something that I regret.
Did you deal with Trump directly
Yeah.
as you were dealing as you're doing this on the show?
Yes,
And
I had direction with him. Now, because the people who did the show dealt way more directly with him than I did, but I had to get him to do various promos. I had to get him to come to certain things. He would, because he knew that I knew ratings and dealt with ratings an awful lot. He would call me every Friday morning in the early days of the show, not for all years, and we would talk about how the show did. And in truth, the show was number one for the week one time, which was the finale of the first season. After that, it was never number one. Did well. We made a lot of money at NBC on it, but it was number one time. And so he would always, when he would call, I'd say number one show on television, to which I would say we did very well. And he would say number one show on television. Now, I was on the West Coast. He was on the East Coast. He had probably seen the ratings about 3 hours before even I got them. He had probably talked to people well beforehand. I was probably his fifth call of the day, but he still said number one show on television. And I would try to correct him with the ratings, and that didn't matter. And I began saying, well, is he just not paying any attention? Or does he just say what he wants to say? And it turns out that, yes, he will say something incorrect over and over and over again, hoping that people will eventually think that it's real. He would even do that at the press tour to TV critics who ratings were their job. And they would just laugh at him because he would just say that. But he would, undeterred, he would continue saying it over and over again. He said, you must be looking at the wrong ratings. Well, there's only one ratings. So that's the way I looked at him. The other part that I dealt with him, because we would talk regularly and I would see him at the press events. And I also had my people work with him because we were out in LA and we would go to New York to shoot. But I will tell one story at the end of the wrap party of the third season, and the way that the show worked, that there were two teams that would go against each other. And the first time it was men versus women, and then they divided up a little bit. So men versus women, and a man and woman switched sides. And then season 3 was book smart versus street smart. It just sort of to create an interest. So he came up to me at the wrap party and said, John, I got a great idea for season 4. I said, okay, Don, what is it? Black versus white. Yeah, no, that should have been my reaction. But you can imagine that you don't say, what are you, crazy, to him. So in a nanosecond, I said, well, I can understand why you think that would be a big idea. Everybody would be talking about that. There'd be
but hold on, wait. Let me just come back. Why not though?
Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
What would have happened if you just said that's crazy?
Okay, well, so this is what would have happened and what I told him, and this was the real part. He'd made most of his money off of the integrations that appeared within the show. These two teams of apprentices would be figuring out how to market a toothpaste or how to get people to go to see a theme park or something like that. Those companies would not touch something that pitted black versus white. It was against their policies. They would get eaten up in the press. They would lose market share. It was not smart business
They
to do
definitely
that.
would.
Yes. Not the least of which our affiliates would have gone crazy. The advertisers wouldn't have bought us, but in this case, he got a salary, but he got most of his money off of those integrations, like literally millions of dollars, because if you're integrated into the show, you can't DVR it and fast forward it through it or anything else. It's in the show.
Was there anybody who was like, this is a good idea, that is flattering him, right?
Well,
At
I don't know that. I don't know that for a fact. I only know about three or four people who knew this before it got killed. Having talked to the head of reality, he got a call from Mark Burnett, who was executive producer of the show, and said, Trump wants to do black versus white. And he didn't say no, so was, I guess, taking the temperature of the network executives. Then he called Jeff Zucker, who was my boss at the time, and Jeff says, "No, we're not doing that." And so that pretty much killed it. I didn't necessarily have the ability to say to Donald to forget it, but
it,
I did tell him it was a bad idea, as did my wife.
when he had the idea, did he go into any details or specifics
Okay,
about what
the
he
one,
found compelling about
no,
the matchup?
first of all, I think he thought it would be noisy. I think he sort of wanted to see it. And now this is what I've heard from the producing people, but I didn't have any direct contact with him. He wanted to have the black team in a range of color from very black to somewhat white.
And he was specific about that.
Yes. Now, I did not hear that from him directly, so I'm giving you a sense
Right.
that that's what I heard from the producers say that he wanted.
And he wanted that because why? The producers.
I don't know. I guess he wanted a social experiment for it. They wanted to see if color had actually anything to do with how well they did. There's all sorts of dark things that come out of that, but it never got that far because it was never accepted. But it speaks to him about the sort of level of insensitivity towards any issue that can deal with the American public and or race or people.
Take me inside your first impression of him when you've met him. I've only met him once, and he's charming.
Yes, he is.
Um, he's
That
charming. He is I'm like, if Donald Trump was selling condos, and he is, right? That's what he did for a lot of his career. I'm not sure you're getting out of the building without buying the condo, right?
you give him credit for what he is. He's sort of an entertainer. He's a great salesperson. And he knew because he appreciated compliments so much himself, he figured everybody else did too. And so I bet that when he met you, he complimented you. I can't tell you how many times he called me a genius because I was marketing the show, and maybe I was good, but I can't say I was a genius at what I did. But anyway, he would do that, and yes, that is sort of an impression that he gives. But there is a very dark side to him that you quickly learn as well.
When did you first see the dark side?
First of all, the idea of the sort of the compliment hole that could never be filled was part of it. If they could, does he have any sense that he does this? That was one. Secondly, he would be one of the few talent who would ask for full page ads supporting how wonderful he was in the New York Times after the end of a season. So you got a sense that he was okay, he needed to be stroked an awful lot. But then if you said anything bad about him, and I didn't necessarily, I was always very able to kind of manipulate and walk it through with him. But I remember a conflict that he had with Rosie O'Donnell. She said something, and Rosie O'Donnell had nothing to, he could have easily just brushed that off, but he could not stand to have somebody say something bad about him. So there was that piece of it. But mostly we were dealing with a television show. And he was in his own way sort of a piece of talent. He was a guy that had failed a number of times. He was a bit of a clown. but he was not any danger to the country. It was when all of a sudden he was using some of these skills of spin that he had mastered on the American public that it became very dangerous because it looked like he was going to have a power that he should never have had and should never have again.
When you think about him, when did The Apprentice go on the air?
Went on the air in January of 2004.
January 2004. It came off the air in
It migrated some. It probably came off the air about 2000, maybe 13 or 14. It got to the point where he wanted to run for president the first time, and he wanted to still be on the air while he was running for president. Somehow he didn't see anything wrong with that. And the CEO at the time, I think Sir Steve Burkhardt put it, who said, "No, if you pick one, you can't do both." And so at that point, he decided to take a run for president, and then the show went away. Show went away.
I'm going to hold my line here that I don't know what it is, but that this buffoon is a legitimate business guy. I do not hold you responsible. I give you dispensation
Okay, well, thank you.
and right for it that any sentient human being wouldn't know this by 2004 is beyond my comprehension. I say the state of New Jersey, just all of its flaws, did everything it could to make sure that all of you good people across America and the world knew a prototypical New York hustler, bloviator, bullshitter, par
I think you've captured it well.
par par excellence. So you're in 2012. You're in the latter stages of The Apprentice, and Donald Trump is now, and I have my first public fight, Donald Trump, where he's confronted by Wolf Blitzer about what I say about him, and I call him the head clown in a Republican clown car, and my comments at the time focused on the racial animus embedded in the lie of birtherism that Barack Obama was a Kenyan and how pernicious that was. Does anybody at NBC over that period when Trump is now very overtly, right? If there's lines, right? You were the CEO of the company, you're in management, and let me there's a lot of personalities, right? You're dealing with a lot of personalities. Rosie O'Donnell has a big personality. Donald Trump has a big personality. Whole network full of big personalities. And so the management of the company, I'm sure, filled with big personalities. I know some of them. And you have indulgence, right, for the personalities. You don't want to be in conflict with your stars, with the people that are driving a lot of the revenue. But at the same time, right, there are lines. Does anybody have a discussion when Donald Trump starts to go deep into the birther conspiracy at NBC that this is off the wall, this is a problem, that tells him to stop it, that this is embarrassing for the network, this is racist, what are you doing? Does that happen?
It could, but I would about the time that he started doing that in um, in a serious way, the birtherism thing. We were now on to Celebrity Apprentice. The idea of trying to get a job or anything, the conceit of the show was now just sort of, you had celebrities trying to win some for cash money for their local charity that they liked. So it was no longer pressing that he was going to be a legitimate businessman. The question is, because of the activities that he was doing at that point, would he still be acceptable as a host? Well, there's an awful lot of people on television that have a lot of odd ideas and things like that, he being one of them. And while it
Is
would
there
have been,
like who
it would have
else
been,
is there anyone else like who else is there anyone else on television, right? I'm trying to think of anyone else who's
well,
been on that has
I would say that
like displayed the animus Thank you.
Because he's so public, he's a very unique individual. I would say that Dr. Phil, who has some of those same kind of things, is on TV and he's syndicated and television stations have the ability to choose to buy him or not, versus the NBC, where the affiliates mostly just sort of carried all the network lineup. There was another case where a guy is pretty much off the wall and says things that way and does that. And then you could look at almost anybody over at Fox News, Tucker Carlson being one of those that I would say has done some things that are totally inappropriate towards the American scene, and they are still on the air, and for some reason people appreciate that. So there are those that are objectionable, but I don't think Trump was kept on so much because of that. I think that the show was doing what it was doing, and about the time that he wanted to move into politics, that's when it became a non-starter, and he said you can't do it.
What is the legacy of The Apprentice?
Well, I suppose that's the reason that I came forward. The legacy of the president, it is the show that made Donald Trump a respectable businessman when before he was largely failed and limited to New York. Outside of New York, and I would say New Jersey, where people saw that he tried to be on the front page of the New York Post all the time and wanted to be seen and heard however he could. We created a notion of Donald Trump as a legitimate businessman that people outside of New York really didn't have. And so the legacy of him being a legitimate businessman because of the work that was reflected in The Apprentice is kind of how he is seen, and was, to a large degree, the reason that I came forward.
Did you ever feel his anger directed at you? Did you ever upset him or anyone in your marketing space during the course of the show?
And when you're marketing, you try to get the talents to do what you wanted to. So we didn't get too much time where we would challenge. The closest that I would got to that was when I challenged him on the idea of black versus white. And had I said what I was thinking, which was sort of your response, I probably would have gotten his wrath. However, I just simply knew how to position it with him in something he understood. He was going to lose money, and that all of a sudden gave him a second thought. And then, quite honestly, when my wife said, "I think you're wrong," in that sort of public setting, he sort of moved away.
I want to go deeper into the details of this again. So are you in this story, are you the first person who's exposed to the idea of black and white?
I don't know for sure. I certainly think I was a trial balloon because I think that he might have had a conversation with Mark Burnett. And Mark said, "Boy, I'm not sure that the network guys are going to go for that." So he probably said, "Well, I'm going to go to the marketing guy and see if I can get his support. And maybe if I get his support, then it'll go forward." I'm totally speculating there because I've thought of that myself. Was I the first guy? Because I haven't heard it before. And I didn't hear it from too many other people. And the only other people that I knew who knew about it were Burnett, a guy named Jeff Gaspin, and then Jeff Zucker and me.
So Mark Burnett, right, by personality type.
And
Somebody,
later, I will say something later on, just to say, well, you're sure it really happened. Sometime after that, he went on Howard Stern and said, "I have this great idea for The Apprentice," and they didn't go for it. It's black versus white. And Howard Stern had pretty much your reaction. Robin Quivers, who was his sort of co-host, basically said, "I think there would be riots in the streets." That was her response to it, which I think that was probably a less filtered response than I was willing to give, or perhaps even Howard Stern, miraculously.
so Jeff Zucker didn't entertain it.
Yeah, said no,
Did not.
did not.
And this idea goes away.
Goes away.
It goes away. Any other observations about Donald Trump from that period as this was getting ready to launch? Did his behavior change at all when this became a success, or does he exist in a space case where he's a success no matter what, regardless of this show failing
Well,
or doing well or
well,
whatever.
if you talk to him, he was always a success, whether he had a bankruptcy or not. That was it was deny everything and claim victory for everything. That's sort of what he does and what he continues to do. He takes no blame but all credit. And so that became more and more apparent. And most other stars that deal with shows, you go through a publicist or you go through the producer. No, you could talk to Trump directly. You just give him a call and he'd answer. He simply loved the buzz of it and the adulation of it. And um, you know, in 2004 to 2007, when I was probably most involved with it, after that, it sort of kind of ran on its own. Um, he was he was kind of the real estate clown in the show, and your idea of the lead clown in the clown car, it was true back then, and you could see it. Someone asked me who knew that I had been working with him, would you ever support him for president? And I kind of laughed and said, no, he would be a terrible president. Turns out I was right. And the thing is that I'm more concerned this time because at least when he came in the first time, he had no idea what it was all about. He still doesn't have very much of an idea, but he now knows that people said no to him, which he did not like. And the type of people that he will have by his side this time are people that I feel are dangerous and can literally make him the strong man that he idolizes. I think he wants to be Viktor Orban. Now, say, go ahead, move to Hungary and be Viktor Orban. I don't care. Don't stay here.
I have this duality that I wrestle with when I look at Trump. Because on the one hand, he is very, very dangerous.
Yes.
And on the other hand, he is a perfectly formed buffoon.
Well, those two things now go hand in hand.
Talk to me about that, right?
Okay.
Because
Well, the buffoonery piece of it is that he can be in the middle of a campaign and he will dance to music for 32 minutes. Or he will be in the middle of a campaign and he'll talk about how well hung Arnold Palmer was.
did he do things like that on The Apprentice? Did he hold court? Was he around when they were filming scenes he was not involved in? Was he omnipresent? Was he
He was most present in the boardroom scenes. And the boardroom scenes that, they started as maybe 10 minutes. They probably came 20 minutes of the show because they do tend to capture the audience attention because he was so unpredictable, just as unpredictable now. I mean, he would fire people that had done a good job, and he would hire people that had done a bad job, and he would do it for some odd reasons. But those sessions would often take 2 and 3 hours to film, and then you would see the 20 minutes the way the producers wanted to show him. There was plenty in those moments in the boardroom that probably did elicit racist behavior or in things that are inappropriate, but they were all carefully manipulated. And there were times when he would fire somebody that was a good candidate, and they would have to go re-edit the show to find something about that candidate that looked inappropriate in order to make it seem like it was a legitimate decision other than the capricious one that he had made.
were you ever there as they're filming?
I did not go to film most because almost all of that was done in New York, and I was based in LA at the time.
What about how much attention was put into doing his hair, doing his makeup as part of the show?
I don't think the show or the makeup artist involved with the show could do any more than he does to himself. I mean, clearly he has a hairdresser with him all the time, and he has, I
And
think
was
he,
that part of the firmament of the show, right? That
no,
Trump's
no, not really.
entourage, he's
That just
rolling
sort of,
in.
that came along for the ride.
That's what I mean, right? Like when Trump shows up, where like for The Apprentice, is he rolling in his entourage? He's got his hairdresser with him. He's
Yeah,
got his
well,
makeup person with him. What?
he had that, or he had it done beforehand, so it didn't look inappropriate. But I think he spends time with a hairdresser every day.
Any eruptions, any stories of him losing it stuff, any stories of him punching down, bullying behavior?
There were things at the time when he was still sort of running a company, and there was one time when he did and I think that somebody followed him, and this could have been a syndicated thing, where they followed him into a meeting at one of his golf clubs, and he was meeting with his people, and there he was very abusive in that particular one, and I think that they asked that to stop airing that because it shed him in a light that he didn't want to be reflected in. But I think that he is careful to project what he wants to project most of the time. The other part that, if you go back to 8 years ago, and what I thought would have been disqualifying back then, so you were talking, and checked a couple of your early podcasts, you talked about things that had been disqualifying for previous candidates. How he survived the Access Hollywood tape was remarkable to me, and by calling it locker room talk, just seemed to be crazy. But somehow, his how do I spin this? He then found people that had an affair with Bill Clinton when he was about to do a debate against Hillary Clinton. Not that the two had much to do with each other, but somehow he could say, "Well, I guess maybe I'm saying that I did this, he did that. That's just the way things are. Things are." I mean, he basically said, "Don't look at me, point over there." And so that's some of what I saw from him.
Well, there were no small number of people in the 1950s and early 1960s as television was popularizing and the TV sets were mainstreaming into everybody's household who predicted it would lead to the end of civilization. And maybe they had a point. We'll see. But I do think that Trump is a world-class demagogue and a world-class manipulator at a time in a moment where everyone is connected together, where every thought can be shared instantaneously with no restraint whatsoever, where there is a brokenness in the media, an inability to tell truth from fiction, a timidness in corporate media talking about what Trump is and what he's become. Our politics is shaped by a lot of illusions and a lot of shadows. But I think that 2 weeks out in this race, you have perfect clarity about who Donald Trump is, what he wants to do, and what he was before he became president, which was not a successful businessman. It was as a New York City carnival barker, a hustler, New York Post, page six celebrity, somebody who existed in the swirl like a goldfish in the bowl is not made a shark in the ocean. Trump was a creation of a small pond, and the people who cover it in New York City was able to monetize it. And in the end, I think Winston Churchill had it right when he said the democracy tends to deliver to its people the government they deserve. And so while I don't deserve Trump and you may not deserve Trump, the American people may choose and may prove that they deserve Trump in the next 2 weeks, and we'll see.
Yeah, I'm hoping that that won't be the case, that most specifically, there will be enough younger people who feel, who is this old guy that says these crazy things, does these crazy things, that is inappropriate to anything that I recall a president ever doing, and say, we just can't have him. And then, listen, I can't quite imagine why this race is as close as it is, considering that I find one candidate just inappropriate for the job. If we're doing The Apprentice right now, and we're thinking, okay, we're down to one candidate over here who is like an accomplished prosecutor and a senator and a vice president and has acclaim from major universities. And the other guy, you have somebody who maybe graduated from Wharton, or maybe he simply bought his way. We never found his grades. He won't do his taxes. Won't see that. He's now a 47-time felon. He's basically been convicted of sexual abuse of E. Jean Carroll. I mean, what more can we say between these two people? And yet, one's about to be hired, one's about to be fired, and there's still tension in this TV reality that we're facing in real life before us. There's no way that I would not say, you're fired to Trump, you're hired to Kamala Harris. And I wish that the entire American public would think the same, and that's the reason that I came for.
And there you have it. And people, when you hear that choice, remember this: there's no Geraldo, Gary Busey, or Meatloaf on the ballot coming to the rescue. It's Trump versus Kamala, and it's an easy choice.
Yeah, I think
John
so.
Miller, thank you very much for your time today.
Nice spending time with you. Thanks very much.
You got it. Thank you. I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning, and I invite you to subscribe on our Substack, on our YouTube channel. Follow us. Welcome to the community.